Greetings, this is Artie from Artifact Electronics, and today we're going to get started on another pinball machine which also came from the same haul in which I got the Terminator 2. This one is a Williams Whitewater from 1992. An interesting game that didn't do too well when it first came out, so they didn't make that many of them. But it's a real sleeper because all of a sudden everybody wanted one. And it's become one of the most desirable games made in the early 90s. So it's a whitewater rafting theme. Has a topper with a light animated waterfall on it. It's generally in pretty good shape, better than the Terminator, but looks can be deceiving. It's going to need a complete playfield teardown, has some electrical problems. Cosmetic problems are a lot. See those big two gaping holes in the top of the bumper caps? Those are plastic mountains, and obviously it takes a ball hit and the plastic goes away. They're very thin. Other features are, there's Bigfoot. He's looking away right now. Has a little bar in front of him to divert the ball. He's going to need a shower. Things are dirty. Not as dirty as we've seen previously because this machine was cleaned up, I think, before I bought it, but you know, the usual stuff. There's a black rubber on the flipper, and looking through the ramp, there's a white rubber around the post. So things were just kind of haphazardly replaced as absolutely necessary. So yeah, we got to tear it down, clean up everything. And yeah, it's a fun game. I quite like it myself. It's a difficult game, but come along. This machine is well traveled. It's a so-called reimport, and what that means is all of these pinballs were built in the US and then sent all over the world. And then after a few years, a lot of them came back to the U.S. Thus the word reimport. I mean, I've seen machines mostly from Germany and Italy coming back. It's the first one I've seen that doesn't come from those two countries and isn't even close to those two countries. So, and here's the giveaway. So this machine came from Japan. I guess it was set up in a Taito arcade. And it got played. I mean, if you go by the counters on it, it has over 100,000 games played on it. I guess paid games, because the counter counts coin drop rather than how many times you hit the start button. It's rated, you know, for Japanese AC voltage at 100 volts, and I got to make sure that they actually converted that, because it will run off 120 volts AC in the US, but things are going to get stressed a little bit. Most voltages are regulated, so the 5 volts will be 5, plus minus 12 will be right, but other voltages like the 50 volts or so it uses for the solenoids, that's unregulated, so you could, if it wasn't converted down or up to 120 volts, things would be running, the voltages, the unregulated voltages will be 20% higher. So basically the 50 volt solenoid will turn into 60 volts. And that'll make for quite a zippy game that will probably start destroying your playfield. And maybe that's why the mountains and other stuff like that's broken on the playfield. Also the flash lamps, not the regular lamps, but the flash lamps, they run off 20 volts. And the 20 volt increase, again, would make them run at 24 volts, making them nice and bright and shortening their lifespan by probably more than 20%. So that's one of the things we're going to do on this machine, is check if the transformer, I mean, it's a universal transformer that can, and there's a connector you can repin to basically select 100 volts, 120 volts, or 220 volts. And we just have to check that out and make sure that it's been repinned correctly. So where do I start? Power's up, but I guess the first thing that hit me was the sounds. The sounds were very weird. Some of the sounds sound perfect, and other sounds sound like very tinny, like they're being run through a high-pass filter. So I guess we should have a look at the soundboard and see what may be the problem. The seller told me that he really didn't want to sell this machine and keep it in his collection. And yeah, I wasn't sure whether that was a sales tactic or he meant it. I don't know, but I asked him, I said, why? Is this one of your favorite games? And he said, yeah, kind of, but the main reason he wants to keep it is, here's a shot of Uncle Willie, the star of this game, and he said his children said that he looks like Uncle Willie. And I kind of agree with his children. He kind of looked like this, but anyway, money talks, so I ended up with the machine anyway. So here we have a soundboard. Let me give you a quick analysis of how I think it works. It's all driven by a CPU, conveniently hidden by the warranty sticker here. It's a 6809, and it drives two sound sources. The first sound source is mostly this section here, and it's just straight digital samples being played back through a deck, which is over here. So they probably got tables in there telling you the start and length of each sample. Processor says play sample number 3. Processor looks it up in some table and blasts them out through the DAC. That is mixed with some op amps and finally piped into the power amp over here. The second sound source is it's a Yamaha YM2151 FM generating chip. They used this chip in a lot of the lower end DX series of keyboards. Yamaha did themselves. And I know they're very stingy with selling these to other companies because they don't want to have too much competition against themselves. I know I tried to buy some of these years ago and they just laughed me off. And then finally told me that I had to fill out an application form and describe exactly what application I was targeting. So, but I guess a soundboard and a pinball machine didn't seem like big competition to them, so they supplied Williams with these chips. Now, the FM chips come in a 6-operator and 4-operator flavor. The more operators, the better sound generating quality, but these were the low end, the 4-operator types. And this is paired with yet another Yamaha chip, which is a YM3012, and that's just a serial DAC, and it has to be paired because the FM chip outputs a serial stream of digital data that gets converted to analog here. So that's the second sound source, and that also gets mixed in the mixing section and then output through the power amp. There's a whole bunch more of TTL digital stuff over here, and I guess that's the interface that is connected to the CPU, the main CPU, through this connector that basically tells it what sounds to play. And the problem, since the sounds sounded correct in what they were playing, but they sounded like some of them were high-pass filtered and sounded really thin. Of course, my first suspicion is capacitors, so without even looking at schematics or anything, I started to measure capacitors. There are all kinds of capacitors here. We have our electrolytics here, and these blue guys, a few more off camera. Then we have tantalums that are also polarized tantalums, and usually these things go bad. And they have the bad habit. Most other capacitors, when they go bad, they open. But when the tantalums go bad, they short. So of course that was my first area of suspicion. There's quite a few of them on here. Here's one, and then here's 3 of them, and they're sprinkled all over the place. But I measured the tantalums in circuit, and they were all good. Then, of course, we have our ceramic caps, bypass caps all over the place, and those rarely go bad. The big guys measured good. They were a little low in value. They're supposed to be 4,700, and they were closer to 4,000. And yeah, they need to be replaced, but not right now. I'm not doing a wholesale replace of everything. I am fixing the problem right now, or I'm trying to fix the problem. Then we came to these blue electrolytics, and the funny thing was every single one of them measured bad in circuit. I mean, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and a 6th one hiding back here. So you usually can't measure reliably in circuit, so the next step was to remove them. Well, what I did with these was I took the fastest way out. I basically removed one of the legs and just pulled it out, which isolates it from the rest of the stuff, and we can just clip our tester to it and measure them. And you can just heat up the solder joint and then pull out one side of them. One piece of advice is when you heat the solder joints, there's old solder in it and it doesn't really want to flow. So put a bit of fresh solder on them first, which will mix with the old solder and immediately melt the joint, and these come out really easy. And you're going to have to clean out the holes later anyway, whether you put these back in place or replace them with new ones. So the one I'm clipped to is rated at 100 microfarads, 35 volts, and it is, in fact, out of circuit, as you can see. And then it takes a really, really, really long time. And then well, actually this one didn't take that long, and it tells us that it measures at 329 picofarads. And yes, that is bad. Jumping onto one of these, the remaining electrolytics, the blue ones are all 47 microfarads, or are supposed to be 47. And measuring this one says 253 picofarads. All of the blue ones come out with just low picofarad value, so guess they're no good anymore. These guys checked okay. As I said, they were a little low. But then, of course, the curiosity is, so if the electrolytics went bad, what about the tantalums? And I did measure them in circuit, but this particular one I pulled out. And so we're clipped onto this now. And let's see what this one says. It's supposed to be 1 microfarad. That's what it's marked as. And it tells us that it's 1 microfarad, 1028 nanofarads. ESR of 2.7, bit high, but the V-loss is 0.3%. So that one's good. And all the other tantalums tested similarly. So every single one of the blue electrolytics is bad. Oh, and I forgot, there were also 2 electrolytics mounted here and here. And yeah, I couldn't lift one leg on them because the leads are too short. So I removed these. And let's test these also. Oh, and these are supposed to be these are also 47 microfarads. So these two actually weren't as bad as the blue ones, except, 1/4 of the capacitance at 10.33. The ESR is really good. Well, actually, no, it isn't. I just noticed that it says 0.15, but it's K ohms. And the V-loss on it is 33%. So these two guys are also bad and need to be replaced. Yeah, the loss is 33%. Now that discovery prompted me to pull the soundboard out of the Terminator. I keep talking about the Terminator as if all of you've watched that. If you haven't, one of the previous series was on the repair and restoration of a Terminator 2, a Williams Terminator 2 machine. And that's the machine I'm referring to. It also sounded to me like the sound was a little tinny, not as bad as the one on the Whitewater, but it still didn't sound right to me. I mean, I have a pretty good recollection of what they're supposed to sound like. But anyway, I did the same testing procedure on it, and to my surprise, this showed the exact same symptoms as this one. All of these blue caps here are bad. These two are good. They're actually better than these. They're much closer to the rating of 4,700 microfarads. The tantalums were all good, and the two caps that were in here also tested bad. Very suspicious that both machines should show the same symptoms, the soundboards at least, but I guess don't look a gift horse in the mouth and start replacing capacitors. All right, let's see if it made a difference. Yeah, I can tell from that it did sound different, but let's put it in sound test mode. whether or not that's what the sample sounds sound like. Are supposed to sound like. They're 8-bit. They're probably using a real low sample rate because there's no compression on these. Needless to say, this is not an audiophile's dream, but this is what the machine is supposed to sound like, and it looks like we fixed the soundboard. While I was at it, I did the Terminator 2 board too, and with very similar results. Sound quality has increased. The digitized speech on this is much better. Arnold's voice is, you can hear it better, but that's because this one has, looks like it has more EPROMs on it. Or maybe not. Let me go look at the other one. And no, they have the same amount of EPROMs, but they probably put less speech, less digitized speech in here, and ran a higher sample rate, probably closer to 20K, because Arnold's voice had to be clear. But anyway, you can see some of the caps I've replaced. I didn't have the axial ones that were in there originally, so I put in radial ones, just bent the leads. If these were any bigger or heavier, since they're in a very demanding environment, the pinball machine gets shaken a lot, I would probably put a dab of hot glue to hold them in place, but these things are really, really light, and I don't think that would make any difference. One other big difference I felt was the heatsink on the power amp on both machines was getting very hot very quickly. I mean, too hot to the touch almost. And I've had the Whitewater running for about half hour now, and you can easily touch the heatsink on that. It's warm, all right, but not so warm that you can't touch it. So something else got fixed. I also found another hidden cap right here. Not hidden, but I was just looking at it from the front. And that's directly tied, has something to do with the power amp. And I replaced that one too, a 22 microfarad at, what was it, 25 volts? Maybe that did it, but anyway, the full electrolytic cap replacement, not including the tantalums, basically fixed both boards. And on to the next problem. You may have noticed that when I was turning on the machine, it always said factory settings restored. And we saw the same thing on the T2. What that means is the backup batteries have failed, and which are stored in static RAM. And when it loses the batteries, then it loses the settings and reverts to the factory settings. Now the batteries on this, I pulled them. It was actually working before I pulled them, but looking at it from the outside, you can probably see over here and here that the batteries have leaked over the contact. And if we look at the back, we can see some nice buildup over here, which we're going to get rid of just like last time. This is more severe than what we saw on the T2, but I'm pretty sure it doesn't look like it has done anything to the chips underneath yet. So we'll try to get that cleaned up. Small chemistry lesson is in order. The battery leakage is an alkaline, and what we want to do is counteract that with an acid, such as vinegar, see if we can neutralize it, and then use lots of IPA to clean off all remainders. Basically, an alkaline has a pH of 14, and acid has a pH of 0, and neutral is a pH of 7. So what we're trying to achieve is a pH of 7. Well, not only achieve that, we actually want to get rid of all of the corrosion on here caused by the alkaline. So, I mean, the procedure is basically take a Q-tip, put lots of vinegar on here, let it stew for a while, then spray it with IPA, isopropyl alcohol, and the alcohol will hopefully clean things up and evaporate quickly, and we will have clean contacts. Another thing I'm going to do is check if there's an updated EEPROM out there. This is level LA2, and we'll see if I can find something newer and burn a new EEPROM for this. So let's start cleaning. Okay, cleaned up nicely. Put new batteries in there. I also found a new upgraded ROM, and everything's plugged in, so it should no longer complain about anything when I turn it on. So ooh. So, yeah, it seems to work, but I've been noticing another problem, and let's see, there's a messed up column right here. See how the S looks weird? Now when it flashes, you can actually see random pixels being on and off. Come on there. Okay. So let's do what needs to be done, and let's see if the built-in test will actually help us out. So we'll go to there, you can kind of see it here. Look at the I in single. The O is missing a pixel on top and on the bottom. So that column, the L's missing a pixel, the E is messed up. That one column seems to have a problem. Now, generally what people would do is say that display's bad, put a new one in. But let's first see what the actual test tells us. Where's the display? Come on. There it is. Okay. Things look normal with the column test. The row test. See that? There's a flicker. Oh, there you go. Right in the middle of the, well, to the left side of the screen. Just bad spots. So obviously, well, we still don't know what the problem is, but there's definitely a problem here. Dancing pixels. We can see the pixel missing on the top frame. On the A in paging. There you go. It's telling us that there's a RAM data error. So most likely the display is still good, but we'll have to take out the display board, find out where the RAM is, and replace it. And hopefully that'll be it. It could be the RAM, it could be the support circuitry, but probably the easiest thing to do is to replace the RAM first. So here's a display board that drives the dot matrix display. The display resolution is 128 pixels by 32, and I think each pixel can take on one of 4 intensities, 0 being off, of course, and then 1, 2, and 3 are increasing. 3 is basically the brightest. And this is kind of interesting, the approach they took, that the way the card is built, basically this is the offending RAM chip. I mean, this is the only RAM on here. And it's used as a frame buffer. It's dual ported, so which means that 2 people can quasi-simultaneously talk to it. So the main CPU in the machine talks to this. It writes into the frame buffer to tell it what to display. It can also read the frame buffer, obviously, because it gave us a RAM error, so it did perform a RAM test. And then on the other side, all of this TTL stuff you see basically harvests the data from here, and that's the second port that has access to this chip, and sends it out sequentially, I guess. Well, it's not sequentially. The way this works is it selects a row and column of a pixel, and then it outputs a data value to it between 0 and 3, and that determines how bright that shows up. Does it for all of the pixels, and then does it over again. Unlike a TV, there's no sync here. The dot matrix display doesn't need a sync. It's all the timing is handled here, and I guess they just try to blast out the frame buffer as quickly as they can. And it's just interesting that it's all built out of off-the-shelf TTL stuff here. The other section is it supplies the high voltage to the DMD, which requires, I don't know exactly, it's like plus 60 DC, minus 100 and minus 120 DC, or something like that. Those are the 3 voltages required by the dot matrix display, and this is the part that usually goes bad first. It is under spec'd. If you look on the underneath, you can see that this one is pretty well cooked. If you look at it closely, this has had no repairs made to it, and I'm not going to touch it, but basically all the stuff in front. There's the 3 high voltage transistors, bunch of diodes, both Zeners and regulars, in here for the regulation to help these transistors out in regulating the voltage. And that's the display board. Now I have measured the voltages getting to the dot matrix display, and they look pretty good. But as the machine told us, this is probably bad. And as you can see, it's a 60, what is it? It's a 6264, which is an 8 kilobyte static RAM. So the very first thing we have to do is make sure that we have a replacement, so we don't stand there with our soldering iron in our hand. And looking through my parts, I actually have an exact replacement for it. The only difference is I can't read the date code on this. It says, I don't know, 2365-1, something like that, whereas this one has an actual date code on it. This machine was built in '92, so the chips are pretty close. The manufacturing dates are kind of close. This one was built made in the 28th week of 1991, and this one was probably made a few months after that. So we do have a replacement here. And the first thing we got to do is cut out that chip. And I've talked about this before. I'm going to use a method that offers the least amount of risk of damaging the board. I mean, heating up the pins, sucking the solder out, whether you use a vacuum solder sucker or whatever, you're still stressing the board, the pads on here. Since it's pretty certain that this chip is bad, I'm just going to cut all the pins and then pull the pins out individually and clean up the holes and put a socket in the new chip. But before we get to that, a brief discussion about side cutters. I have several side cutters in my toolbox, and let's go through them real quick and see, and I'll share my experience with them with you. First is the bottom end. This one came from Harbor Freight. They have many stores and sell very cheap tools. And generally you get what you pay for. This one was $2 on sale. I've had it for over a year. It still cuts. And it's in good shape. So for $2, I highly recommend this one. Next we have one I bought from Radio Shack, when Radio Shack was still around. This one lasted for a few months because the blades get dull really quickly on this. And if you look at them closely, I can't really show you, but they get serrated and they basically don't cut anything anymore. But I guess with the dull blades, it'll double as needle nose pliers maybe. But not that it matters, but not recommended, obviously. Next up the ladder, we have this Pro Kit cutter, which I got from a local electronics store. It was $10. And it's performed really well. As a matter of fact, it's my go-to tool for cutting pins. So, you need side cutters, and your local electronics store carries them. The Pro Kits, this is a good one. Then we get to the king of the hill, the professional Excelite, don't know how to pronounce it, but I think this one was close to $30. However, it has horrible tooth disease. One day, and I didn't even cut anything ridiculously thick, or I don't know, I was just cutting something. I was cutting wire, or maybe it was a little thicker solid core wire or whatever, and lost its tooth. Needless to say, not recommended. So when people tell you buy the more expensive tools you buy, the better they'll serve you, that's not always necessarily true. But of course, what can we do to salvage from this expensive piece? So what I was thinking is, let's pull the handles off. Those are still nice. And give the Harbor Freight ones, which really have crappy handles, but don't want to come off. One of them came off. Ow. And give them the deluxe handles. And voila. I can now fool myself and all of my friends into thinking that I have $30 side cutters that I use on a daily basis. Isn't that something? Okay, off to the races. Goodbye. And here we go. So, as I mentioned, I prefer this approach. I mean, when I know that the chip is dead or I have plenty of replacements, there's no need to save it, then this is the best approach to take. However, if you're removing a chip that is rare, you don't have a replacement for, or whatever, then you got to bite the bullet and desolder it very carefully until all of the pins come out, while being careful not to damage the board. It's usually blind pads. What I mean by blind pads is it's just a pad that doesn't have a connector or a trace coming off it. It's not able to basically act as a heat sink. So the pads get really, really hot, and when you finally remove the chip, the pads come off too. That doesn't happen here, and off we go. Next, of course, you need a pair of pliers. And these are anti-magnetic, anti-acid, stainless steel, made in Pakistan. So the next step is to get your preheated soldering iron. Actually, I would probably tin the tip a little bit. Then, since I can't see anything, put on my magnifiers. And so after that, it's very simple. It's very simple if I put this in an angle, at an angle where you can actually see. But you heat the pin, grab the pin and remove it. And then you do that for every pin. And the chip is completely, all traces of the old chip are removed. Okay, this is going to be a little difficult to show, but basically you go in and you heat the hole, the solder puller on top of it, and it puts me to shame because it failed. There you go. And as you can see, most of them get pulled the first time, and you develop good muscles in your thumb. And you get the idea. So I'm going to finish this up, clean around it with alcohol and get rid of the little solder splatters that are over here. And we'll put in a socket and then the new chip. And best of all, the warranty sticker is still intact. So they'll never know that I messed with it. And the next time I'll get them to repair it for me. And also, we have all of this leftover stuff here. All those pins, which you can take to your local scrapyard for some extra cash. And just to make it, we'll put some of the pulled solder in there too, and that'll partially pay for your supplies for your repair. Here's what the result looks like, just like when it came out of the factory. Everything came off cleanly, none of the pads or anything else got damaged in here. Look at the back of it. Even better over here. So now all that remains to be done is to solder this socket into place. If I can get it aligned, but yeah, it goes in without resistance. I mean, if you put these in and there's resistance, it means there's solder left in the holes and you should clean them up a little more. But yeah, this one fits in nicely. And one thing I do before soldering is you don't want that thing to fall out of the socket when you're turning it over. So here's my preferred method, is using this blue painter's tape to hold it in place. Solder opposite pins, just 2 pins. Take the tape off and then make sure, turn it back around, heat the pins so the socket sits nice and level, and then you're done. And since we watched all the minutiae of desoldering, we'll solder a few pins. And then see if the machine lied to us about the RAM being bad. I mean, it could be the RAM, it could be the supporting circuitry that went bad, but it probably is the RAM, because if the supporting circuitry goes bad, you will lose not just a single column in the dot matrix display, but rather there'll be errors all over the place. Since our errors are very localized to that one column we looked at, I think it didn't lie to us. But we'll find out in a minute. Well, it looks like at least we didn't destroy it. One thing I noticed in the video, it seems to be showing noise bars over the images. That has something to do with the camera sync. There are no noise bars when looking with human eye sync at it, so that's all good. I can't see any of the bad pixels, but just to make sure, we'll ask the test again, which I guess helped us out this time. And here we go. So it's about that neighborhood where the bad column was. About 1/4 of the way into the screen from the left. Didn't see anything this time, but here you could really see it. And of course here they just showed up as static errant pixels. They seem to be all gone. And we'll have it, let it run through its RAM test. The letters look okay. And there you have it. Fixed. We didn't have to put a new $250 display into this. Actually, you know, the repair cost pennies in solder and a socket and some desoldering braid to clean up the holes. But there you go. I think oh, that screeching noise you hear? I'll show you what that is. That's going to have to be taken care of. That's Bigfoot you're looking at. He has turned his back on you right now, but so he has a bit of a friction problem there, but as we tear down the playfield, which is next on the menu, we will figure out what's dried out in there. Thanks for watching, make sure to like and subscribe. And leave me a comment. I like your comments. You're a great, great audience. The majority of comments are enjoyable, supportive, funny. I really like to read them. So don't be shy and let me know what you think. And we'll see you the next time around.